I've wanted to make this video for a while now, ever since Digibrony and Brony Curious made their respective videos on the subject of destiny. And with Brony Curious' latest video dealing with it once again, it seems like finally the perfect time to do it. As a result, this video will act as a response to all three of theirs, as well as a standalone analysis. Besides, it's about time I made a video which reflects my philosophical name and Cutie mark. My main aim in this video is to explore the relationship between destiny and free will, which Digi and Brony Curious seem to have taken rather for granted, and to argue that contrary to what both of them seem to espouse, destiny is actually required for true free will, and is therefore something to be treasured both in Equestria and the real world. To do this, I will look first at Digibrony and then Brony Curious' views on destiny and MLP, and outline them as the philosophical positions they represent, and how this impacts upon pony society if this is true. After that, I will offer my own model of free will based on compatibilism, and show how this suits both the representation of destiny in equestrian society and the fine gentleman's views far more closely. First up then is the man, the legend, Digibrony. His video, Observations on MLP Destiny, was the first to deal directly with the issue. However, for all of the interesting points he made, the concept of destiny itself, in terms of how it can be defined, was dealt with only very briefly.
I happen to believe in the idea of destiny myself. I think that each of us is set on a causal path through life which is bound to happen exactly one way regardless of what we think about it. The idea that we're making choices about who we are and how we see others is merely an illusion.
The approach Digibrony seems to take is that of hard determinism, which is the view that free will is an illusion, and in actuality every choice we make is determined before we choose to do it. As a result, pony society cares little about choice in the conventional sense, and is instead focused on destiny, the determined path or talent a pony should take, represented by their Cutie mark. However, such a view, as Digi himself acknowledges, leads to the idea of a fixed path which one is doomed to follow regardless of the pain involved, not unlike the tragic structure discussed in my previous video. This is clearly divorced from the free, flourishing, and happy society presented in the show. The philosophical underpinning behind hard determinism is summed up perfectly by the Enlightenment philosopher David Hume in his book An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. Hume writes, "The scientist easily perceives the same force on a spring has always the same influence on the wheels. Philosophers form a maxim that the connection between all causes and effects is equally necessary. In other words, the universe is governed by physical laws which always act in the same way, and since we are within the universe, it follows that we must also be governed by those same laws. This means that the fundamental workings of our brain, our perceptions of the universe, were all determined from the moment it began. Digibrony's evidence for such a view comes from the clear determining factors of the main six, such as Rainbow Dash being predisposed to being a great flyer, as she is biologically determined, or Applejack's taking up of the family business, being psychologically determined. All of this is very true. However, the next conclusion Digi and Brony Curious make from it, that free will is therefore not compatible, is not. Digi briefly hints at the idea of free will and destiny not being mutually exclusive, and this is the view which I will later take to prevent the crushingly depressing society of ponies with no choice in their lives, which otherwise results from the belief in determinism. First, however, I must take a look at the opposite end of the spectrum, taken by Brony Curious.
Destiny kind of throws this concept for a loop, however, because it means that these ethical progressions are now out of the pony's hands. Or hooves. It wasn't growth or enlightenment that led them to the culture they are currently living in. It was simply meant to be. And that, in effect, devalues the moral high ground that the world and its inhabitants represent.
Brony Curious believes, just as many before him, that destiny or determinism devalues life as it robs society of free will. The reason this is such a problem, he says, is because without the freedom to select actions, in what way are those actions resulting from the ponies themselves, and how can they be moral, or when immoral, how can they change? This view is known in philosophical terms as libertarianism, and is the belief that we are not completely determined, and only actions which are not determined can be counted as chosen freely. This is not to be confused with the more widely known Libertarian Party in American right-wing politics. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant was a libertarian, and argued that reason, or rationality, could always be used to change one's action, even if the certain determining factors left one predisposed to act in a particular way. He says, "Now, even if one believes the action to be determined by these causes, one nonetheless blames the agent. This blame is grounded on the law of reason, which regards reason as a cause that, regardless of all the empirical conditions just named, could have and ought to have determined the conduct of the person. This view, however, robs pony society of much of the magic that underpins it, and the very destiny and the power of the Cutie marks is necessarily destroyed, or at the very least diminished, as Brony Curious himself points out in his latest video. Again, just like Digibrony's views, this diminishing of the role of the Cutie marks seems to be the opposite of how they presented in the show, with heavy evidence on their power to literally govern destiny in Twilight's comments in Magical Mystery Cure. However, both of these views of destiny are fundamentally flawed in a far greater way than their not quite living up to the world the show represents. Their issue is the falsity of the very definition of freedom they defend. This next bit will sound a little counterintuitive, but bear with me and you will start to see how the argument fits together. Despite being diametrically opposed views, hard determinism and libertarianism are actually very linked to each other, as they are both what is known as incompatibilist views. What this means is that both the hard determinists and libertarians accept that free will and determinism cannot coincide. Hard determinists believe we are determined and therefore we cannot be free, while libertarians believe we are free and thus cannot be determined. The definition of freedom they both use is exactly the same. The definition in question is again wonderfully summarised by Hume. By freedom, then, we can only mean a power of acting or not acting according to the determinations of the will. The key part of this definition is acting or not acting, the idea that freedom is constituted by being able to have acted otherwise in any action freely chosen. This idea seems natural to us, but when we really break it apart, it is actually far from it. The French philosopher and mathematician Descartes comments upon the inconsistencies of such a definition. Nor is it true that in order to be free I must be capable of moving in either direction, he says. The indifference I feel when I am not moved one way or the other is a lower degree of freedom. In doing so, he drives right at the heart of why this definition fails, because choice actually requires determinism. To understand this criticism, we must first identify the reason anyone makes a choice in the first place. To do this, I will use the simplistic example of why Derpy chooses to eat a muffin rather than, say, a carrot. Obviously, the answer would be because she loves muffins. But why does she love them? Because she likes sweet things, we might say? But isn't this a biological or psychological facet handed down to her? A determining factor, in other words? And under the current view of freedom, determining factors prevent free choice. She exercises frequently, we might say, and can sustain the carbs she might ingest. But again, this is down to her being physically and psychologically predisposed to be energetic or otherwise enjoy exercise, and thus choose the muffin. The truth is, when you start to think about it, all choices are based upon reasons which are themselves either one or many determining factors. If one removed all of them for a free choice, as the libertarians suggest, then all one is left with is random chance, which is surely about as divorced from the concept of freedom as possible, because a choice taken randomly is not one that one cares about at all. As a result, we can see how the view I and Descartes take, compatibilism, follows far more logically, as destiny allows for determining factors, which in turn provide reasons for free choice. Descartes summarises the view as, the more inclined I am in one direction, the more freely I choose it, providing a version of freedom wherein both free will and destiny retain their importance and existence in pony society, and hopefully pleasing both Brony Curious and Digibrony. But before we finish, let's look at how the compatibilist approach affects the events of Magical Mystery Cure. Brony Curious has proposed that what Starswell's spell did was alter the pony's memories.
Think about it. No one's destinies in Magical Mystery Cure were changed because Starswell's spell didn't change their talent. Sure, they may have thought that they had different destinies, but guess what? They all sucked at it. So, obviously, a Cutie mark doesn't alter your natural or cultivated abilities. Rather, Starswell's spell instead altered their memories as to what they thought their talents were. So, even though the script throws around the word destiny left and right, Twi and company apparently aren't using the term in a literal sense, more like a slang term to represent your calling or natural progression. A Cutie mark is not synonymous with destiny, as their destiny did not change with their mark. In fact, a Cutie mark apparently in and of itself does nothing, as a swap didn't even adjust their natural talents either. All it did was alter their memories to make them think that they had different talents. So it naturally follows then that a Cutie mark has no inherent power. It is merely an image that represents the maturity of the individual it appears on.
And while I agree with his view of what the spell does, I do not agree with his view of what it means. Far from robbing Cutie marks of their power as he suggests, it instead reinforces it, if one takes the compatibilist view. This is because under compatibilism, the determining factors in a very literal way are the cause of free will, and thus destiny itself. Therefore, when the memories of the ponies are altered, so too are their destinies, as their memories comprise the psychologically determining factors which make them pursue their path, with only the biologically determining factors remaining unchanged in order for them to fail at their new destiny. Therefore, changing the ponies' memories is the same as changing their destiny, and the logic of the episode, along with the implied power of the Cutie marks, remain intact. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the views discussed in the video. Am I right to support compatibilism, or did Digi or Brony Curious views seem more consistent to you? Let me know in the comments, or inbox me if you prefer. Until next time, have a good day. This is Nightsphere the Gnostic. Goodbye.